Hi, I'm Aaron Montes, and this is Frontera Connected, a new collaboration between PBS El Paso and KTEP. We're going to be hosting a discussion about the Texas Legislature this year, and we've invited community members to talk about special topics so that way we can take some of those comments and concerns to state lawmakers from El Paso. Today, we're talking with Dr. Kathleen Staudt, a retired UTEP professor of political science. Kathy, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for inviting me.
In terms of Operation Lone Star, we saw a lot more DPS get put in El Paso, razor wire being placed on the border. As someone who specializes in studying political science and understanding public policy, what does this mean for an overly democratic city?
Very troubling, I think, for everyone, for our city, for the state, for the binational relationships we have with Mexico, and even for people who are concerned about wasting tax money. Because number one, Operation Lone Star is interfering with a federal responsibility. This is not the job of the state to be putting up walls that will cost billions of dollars over 20 years, and it's already costing a lot. And then also putting these barriers into the river. These are very complicated matters that are, the International Water Commission, which has a counterpart in Mexico. The river matters are very complicated. And then the nature of what they've put into the river is potentially very cruel and destructive for human life and safety. And there's almost a kind of cruelty, I think, that is in back of some of the policies that they have put into place, and a glee maybe associated with cruel barriers that are put up. So yeah, so I'm troubled by these things.
I think one thing that the local government and the federal government were able to demonstrate earlier this year and even somewhat last year is the ability to take in the people that come and surrender themselves to federal officials and go through this process in a pretty orderly fashion. And these barriers seem to only exacerbate these situations in some areas of the border here. Can you speak to just the efforts that you've seen in terms of the cooperation between the federal government, local governments, and nonprofits trying to help these people?
Well, years back, it was mainly the nonprofit community, especially the faith-based community, that stood up and responded to crises of people crossing the border. But more lately, in the last year or so, with Venezuelans and people from other countries coming, there's been this cooperation. The county has an office set up. The city has people responsible. There's a mechanism in place to get reimbursements for these matters. And still, the faith-based community stood up Sacred Heart Church and so on. So the issue was handled relatively well. There were flaws. But nobody sees what happens in the borderlands. Nobody sees that in Washington, D.C., or few people see it, I should say. And so people still respond to this rhetoric of the border being, there's an invasion at the border. It's hateful rhetoric. And some of the people who use that rhetoric for their fundraising purposes or even in their everyday talk, and some of our state officials do that, they don't realize the impact of hate language on mobilizing hate in the larger public. That's why El Paso, had the horrible massacre in 2019. That's what a lot of these massacres are caused by hate rhetoric or people who have too easy an access to guns. An issue that was not addressed in this legislative session either.
What do you believe Austin should do in terms of border policy or, even its own approach to handling these large waves of migration that do tend to happen, especially over the last several years?
Well, for one thing, it is a federal matter, and our Congresswoman, Veronica Escobar, does have a bipartisan bill in place. I think it's called the Dignity Bill. And we need immigration reform. We need it fast. It's long overdue. And long gone are the days when both parties worked together, as they did about 20 years ago, to try to push forward a reasonable yet full of compromises bill related to immigration. I think we need to reestablish that asylum is a policy that we are obligated by international law and signatures we have given, and also by our national laws. Asylum is a procedure that ought to be in place. These laws and international signatures were put into place after World War II with the Holocaust and people who were fleeing horrible situations in Europe after the war. We also need an immigration reform that will recognize people who are already here, not sure exactly how many, 10 million, 11 million, people who have already settled, are nested into our communities, are important for the workforce, they're taxpayers, they buy products in our economy, their children have been educated in our public school system and other schools, and they're a part of our community, and we need to provide a legal pathway for them to get their citizenship. Other countries have developed an immigration policy that looks at workforce issues and determines certain needs that exist. And we don't seem to be able to do that. And yeah, there are going to be tough decisions that have to be made if that is done. But we haven't done it yet. We do have labor shortages. Everybody knows this. Businesses know this. Businesses know that they are, looking for workers, and they can't fill all the spots that are available. So I wish some of the people who resist making a reform in Congress would listen to that and see it. And I wish the business community would step up a bit more and push for immigration reform, because we can all benefit from diverse people who come into our country and who have made it what it is today. I think also something needs to be said about the DACA students who are still in limbo and need to have some security about their situation. They are important for all kinds of reasons, but even for the workforce, as businesses ought to know.
Go talk to any El Paso homeowner, they'll tell you there definitely is an issue when it comes to taxes and property taxes here in the state of Texas. So much so that the governor called a special session to have the legislature and the Senate and the House try and come up with some kinds of solutions. And it very much seems they came up with one particular approach in terms of the homestead exemption. However, I can't help but wonder if there's still going to be impacts, or people are still going to be feeling the pinch from property tax rises over the next couple of years into the next legislature. Kathy, can you just speak to the experience in El Paso when it comes to residents, looking for either a first-time home or just trying to keep up with their own bills at the end of the year?
Yeah, well, El Paso has had a city government that has long been overspending. And maybe there are going to be the kinds of personnel changes in place with the city manager and the deputy city managers to put a halt to some of the wasteful spending that has gone on. El Paso city government has given a lot of tax abatements that many people don't even realize exist, because they're approved under arcane language that people don't even know what might be going on in city government. And it's quite true that appraised values have risen tremendously. People have been paying more and more taxes. For some people, paying taxes and versus being able to keep their homes, this is, these are hard decisions that they are going to have to make. As for what happened in the special session, I thought that they might maybe just cut checks for everybody and send them checks, but no, that didn't happen. And so once again, there's some arcane procedural formulaic measures that are going to be taken that might provide relief for school districts And they certainly need it because school districts are the number one line on our tax bills. So homeowners might get some relief with lower taxes for the independent school districts. But then again, we have people, at least a third, maybe more, who are renting apartments. And one has to wonder whether or not the apartment owners are going to pass on whatever savings they might get for the properties that they own. And if they own multiple properties, they may not have a homestead extension either. And so we'll have to wait and see, I think, what actually happens. I tend to take a bit of a cynical eye toward what comes out of our one-party state. In this state, which doesn't have many checks and balances, which we all learned in civics, are important to have a competitive process, to have checks and balances. And we haven't had that in the state of Texas for about 20 years.
And even this plan will need to have a charter amendment passed, correct? So definitely there's some components here that we're going to have to see play out. However, just in terms of affordability as well, I know that here in El Paso, the cost of living, when you compare it with people's wages, it can be difficult. And so should there be a concern about people being able to hang on to their properties?
Yeah. And I don't know what the legal tools are for that. I hope our legislative delegation knows some of the tools that might exist and that they work with the city and the county to try to make that happen. Because for many people, their homestead, their house is the main kind of equity that they have built up over a lifetime or part of their lifetime. The prices of homes have skyrocketed, and it is, a lot of people, in fact, the real estate market is probably not moving as much as it might because of high interest rates, but also because the prices of homes being sold are just way too high, and people can't afford them, except maybe rich people in California or some of the other states that are looking to flip some houses in our area. Again, we do have to watch the flipping that might go on for our neighborhoods and for our residents.
And even some equity firms purchasing property.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, they worry me tremendously, especially the inroads they have made into the health business. I don't call it the healthcare industry. I call it the health business in our country.
I'm glad you brought up schools and school districts, and particularly, I know that there was a lot of hope that teachers would get better pay, given that a task force was set up, to look at what benefits or what things teachers needed in order to, for the state to retain educators, but also bring in some new ones. It seems like, some policy was made. Do you think that we went far enough as a state?
We definitely didn't go far enough, and there are businesses that are chomping at the bit, hoping to transform growing parts of education into businesses that make profits. The voucher system will probably take root in a stronger way. But there are ESAs. I had to look that up or listen to hear what that is. ESAs are educators' savings accounts that are actually vouchers. And so with this language that is not well understood by people, they're making inroads. And it's quite true that even though there was a year-long teacher task force with teachers' voices being heard, many of the legislators really don't listen to teachers' voices, and local school districts are dealing with high turnover rates, with vacancies. Even substitutes are hard to find with the prices or the wages that are paid to them. And so local school districts are having to dip into their reserves. They always set aside some money to cover emergencies, and they're having to cover this emergency of giving wage increases to teachers that are well below what the inflation rate has been. So some teachers may just say, well, hey, I'm just gonna have to change professions. Teachers also are quite beleaguered by a lot of the rules and what software imposed upon them that was partly relieved in this legislative session, but then replaced with some scripted material that then they have to learn about and then they have to play out in the classroom. And as one of the teachers on the panel said, I'm not a robot. I am, I'm dealing with a complicated group of kids here. And so I can't just memorize a script and play it out in the classroom. So education is still, I think the second session is dealing more with education. There was a little bit more money for education, but not nearly enough to deal with our state. And no one was talking about standardized testing, which is a burden in our state. Teachers also are quite beleaguered by a lot of the rules and what software imposed upon them that was partly relieved in this legislative session, but then replaced with some scripted material that then they have to learn about and then they have to play out in the classroom. And as one of the teachers on the panel said, I'm not a robot. I am, I'm dealing with a complicated group of kids here. And so I can't just memorize a script and play it out in the classroom. So education is still, I think the second session is dealing more with education. There was a little bit more money for education, but not nearly enough to deal with our state. And no one was talking about standardized testing, which is a burden in our state.
In particular, when it comes to how this state has a particular approach with cities at the moment, in terms of what they can implement.
Oh, I am, as someone involved in several community organizations, we're trying to make city government, we're trying to engage with city government to constructively make better policies that are more accountable to the public. And the legislature this time around has finally succeeded in undermining local democracy. How did they do that? With leadership from a Lubbock legislator. They said that any regulation, any ordinances of the city that are anti-business have to be outlawed. And by September 1, there are going to be these changes. And we really need to fight this if we're going to continue to have democracy at the local level. Right now, more and more, Texas government seems like it's a vehicle for business freedom. And now they're trying to make local governments do the same thing. And government is about much more than serving business. It's about people and their quality of life and their health and safety and so on.
And to the point you're trying to make, whether it be requiring businesses have water breaks, right, for their contractors or whatever particular policies they may have for same-sex partners,
right,
as well.
Yeah, no, the water breaks policy got a lot of traction nationwide. I think people were outraged over businesses being able to eliminate water breaks for outdoor workers doing construction and important things we need. And in fact, I think in San Antonio, there was a worker who died, and the business tried to say, oh, they were just, on drugs or something. But, dehydration can cause heat-related illnesses and death very, very quickly, and the family is suing. But people shouldn't have to resort to waiting for a death and then filing a lawsuit against heartless businesses that shouldn't even be able to operate in this way. So yeah, no water breaks and 30 plus days of 100-degree heat plus. I mean, surely in a bipartisan way, we can understand that we are in a climate crisis and we need to do something quick. And we need to protect workers who are working outside.
Thank you so much, Kathy.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for having me on this show.
If you have your own questions or comments for El Paso state lawmakers, you can direct message us, and we'll go ahead and take those to your elected officials.